Hi, everybody. My name is Tracy Heilers. I'm founder and executive director of Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Megan Sweet, who is the director of training at Mindful Schools. She is also the chapter author of Chapter 5 in our new book, Educating Mindfully, Stories of School Transformation Through Mindfulness, which we have 40 chapters all written by different school educators, many of them partnering with different resource provider organizations to create a comprehensive field guide for educators, exactly kind of what's happening right now with the emergence of mindfulness in education in the US. So her chapter title is, for Chapter 5, is Mindful Schools, Transformation Over Time. So that's what we'll actually start with our interview. And then I want to just read quickly her bio. We have all the chapter authors' bios at the end of our book. She has a doctorate in educational leadership, a system thinker who has been in education for more than 25 years. During that time, she's been a teacher, school administrator, and school district leader. Her academic and professional interests rest mainly with how to create effective change in educational context. So as the director of training at Mindful Schools, she's a leader in mindfulness program for educators. And like many of us, wearing different hats, she's not only that director at Mindful Schools, but she's also a published author, podcaster, and blogger. So for my first question for Megan, actually I recorded this after the interview because I was having trouble flipping between her and I. This is the first interview I've done for the summit. So after I get done talking here, you'll just see Megan, but you'll hear me in the background still asking questions. But my first question for her was to just tell a little bit of how she made that transition from those 25 years in schools, being district leader and such, into working for Mindful Schools. And so here she is.
Yeah, in my career, most of the time I've spent is helping districts or states to imagine and implement changes. Some of those have been really big, and actually I helped lead the state of California to change how we fund schools, but also really small, such as creating a change in an individual school. And over time, what I noticed more and more was we were missing some of the key pieces that I thought were increasingly important for us to be able to do the work right. So educators work really hard. I was in situations where a lot of the work was incredibly rigorous and painful and important. When you lead change, there's lots of emotions and things that come up. Generally, no one likes change. So when your career is to professionally change things, you encounter those kinds of emotions quite a bit. And so for myself personally, I was leaning more and more into my mindfulness practice that I'd had since I was a teenager, or actually even younger. And more and more, I was seeing the need for us as educators to have that experience across the board, that what it was giving to me and though it was helping me to feel more empowered was something that I wanted others to be able to encounter as well. So I started doing some research on it. That's what led me to write my book around what are the ways that we might want to, what are the tools we might need to be more effective in our professional lives, but also in our personal lives as well. And it kind of brought me back to mindfulness and had me fall in love with it in a way that I had always just kind of used mindfulness in the past as like if things were really bad or I was really struggling, I would go to mindfulness and then I would, when things were good again, I'd kind of let my practices fall away. And something shifted in the research of the book and in the last, maybe 6 or 7 years now, where suddenly mindfulness became a core part of the way I live my life. And it wasn't an add-on or something additional. So that led me to decide that I wanted to do that more full time. And an opportunity in Mindful Schools became open. And I decided to switch from being a school district person to working at Mindful Schools so that I could have that opportunity to bring mindfulness to others, but from the lens of somebody who's been a practitioner my whole life, which I think is a really important lens to bring to the work.
Yes, yes. And in your chapter, you talked about the evolution of Mindful Schools, and I took the fundamentals and the teacher essentials training. Actually, it was almost 4 years ago, and I've even noticed an evolution in the last 4 years with so many more resources and
Mhm.
such being available once you get past those first core trainings. So maybe just talk briefly about 2007, and then the shift that happened 2012. They can read the whole thing in the chat in your chat during the
Yeah, in the
book, but
chapter.
just share a
Yeah.
little bit.
Well, I think what's interesting about Mindful School's story is that it really just started out with some folks who just had a felt sense that mindfulness was a good idea for kids and started bringing it forward. And and Lori Grossman, who is she's a firecracker. So she gets her mind on something. She's able to put it in place. And so I think it was just a really perfect example of the right people at the right time, in lots of different places that brought Mindful Schools kind of its birthplace. And Mindful Schools started out by giving that direct service into schools. So people who had a deep end mindfulness practice coming into classrooms in the San Francisco Bay Area and teaching mindfulness there. And it was so successful and so popular that suddenly, I think in a lot of ways, Mindful Schools had more work than it knew what to do with. Like it was becoming this thing where pushing into the classroom and providing the support that way became really challenging. And so um, uh, we decided to figure out a different way to do it and decided that actually teaching teachers would be a good way to go so then teachers could teach the mindfulness lessons for themselves. And that kind of switched our offering and our model quite a bit. And that led to a very quick adaptation of like, oh, and actually we could teach teachers in person, but we also teach teachers online. And Mindful Schools has shifted very much to being a primarily online um, platform for teaching mindfulness. And again, like I said, it just kind of came at the right time. Um, and and actually now that we've been teaching mindfulness online for a long time and working with so many people, we're realizing how important the connection is, and we're actually looking for different ways to bring the human connection back in again. So we're kind of almost not going completely full circle, but we're cycling back into how do we have even more in-person connections beyond the main one we have now, which is a year-long program.
Yeah, no, community I feel is, I say priceless. Like I took the trainings from you, but then I realized later that, and when I'm encouraging people to take your trainings, I'm like, just the Facebook group alone after you take the trainings and being part of that Facebook group community has been priceless, with all the sharing
Yeah.
that happens.
Well, so many people, I mean, they're like me in that you're kind of practicing mindfulness on your own. And we find over and over again that people are taking these courses from us, but they don't have people that live near them or in their community that are doing mindfulness as well. And so, and I actually treat it this way myself as an administrator. There's not a lot of room for like, talking about your mindfulness practice when you're in the middle of making these big decisions or kind of dealing with the stresses of leading a school district. So for me, it was this kind of private practice that I didn't share or bring forward into my work. And I think that's true for a lot of the people that come to Mindful Schools. And so the community that you can have online even is really important. And we're trying to figure out even more ways to deepen that community because it is such an important part of the work. And now that we're all separated and dealing with this COVID-19 quarantine, I think people are feeling that need for community and that desire for community even more. So it's been really interesting.
Yeah. And I wanted to thank you so much, Mindful Schools, and you were here at the conference this year. So we've had two Educating Mindfully conferences so far in the Chicagoland area, and Mindful Schools has been such an integral part of both of them, helping promote the conference as well as you come in a day before everybody else and set up this magical, inspirational, I mean, we call it a mindful room exhibition, but I mean, exhibition doesn't really do it justice. It's just a really peaceful place that you can go to at any point during the conference, and very interactive. So I just really thank you for your part in that. But you led two different sessions this year on the big resource day of our conference, where we end with our resource fair. And we have in our summit we recorded one of them that is about embodying mindfulness and nurturing personal practice. The other one that I thought we would focus on for the rest of our conversation today is on taking mindfulness to scale. So whole school implementation of mindfulness. And I know in the session, I'm reading just from the description of it, you shared some of the best practices for starting out, for gaining buy-in, providing professional development. So maybe wherever you want to start with that, you can lead us through maybe some of the information you shared in that session.
Sure. I mean, I think what's interesting, and it definitely was probably true for the people who came to the session, and it's true for a lot of the folks that come to us that want to learn about whole school implementation, is they want like a quick set of strategies, and here are the tools, and you do step A, step B, and step C, and then you're all set to go. And the bad news is that it just doesn't work that way with whole school implementation. We're really excited, and we think that whole school implementation is absolutely the right way to go and necessary next evolution for mindfulness, because there's this real natural inclination to want to bring mindfulness forward, but also such a clear way to see the connection between mindfulness and other larger scale or whole school initiatives that are around social emotional learning or creating a safe school culture. And mindfulness fits really naturally into that space. And so we're excited to be doing the work, but as we've been doing a lot of really careful research and talks about it, we have a team that's developing our approach to whole school implementation now. The main punchline really is that it's very distinct. Each school is very distinct, and so there isn't a set formula. But what we are landing on is some core practices that we think are really important, and actually some guiding principles is what we're calling them, around taking mindfulness to scale. And some of those guiding principles are pretty simple, which is that we need to be embodied practicing mindfulness. So you can't bring mindfulness to scale if the people that are leading that initiative aren't practicing mindfulness. So you need to have you don't need to have everybody necessarily, but having mindfulness be in your school needs to be a value and shared by enough people that it can kind of continue to grow. You need to have administrative support. So it's great to do, and it's easy-ish to do, bring mindfulness into a classroom when you're a classroom teacher, because you have control over your schedule and your time, and you can bring mindfulness forward, and that's a really great modality. But to be able to bring mindfulness to scale into a school, you really need the administrators' buy-in, because they need to be able to give you some time and space on the professional development agenda, support you to think through how to take, it's not just everybody sitting and meditating, or perhaps that's what it is having a sit, but there's a lot of ways that mindfulness can look in a school, and you really need to partner with your administrator to have that come forward. Which means ideally, the administrator has a practice. If they don't have a practice, at least they have a deep understanding of what mindfulness is and why it's important. So you need that administrator buy-in. It needs to be opt-in. So mindfulness isn't something that we ever want to encourage folks to use as a must-do and as a punishment. So you don't ever want to use mindfulness to have kids, use mindfulness in a timeout room, for example, and kind of force mindfulness. It's like I always cringe when people make kids write lines. Like, we don't want to have kids associating writing with a punishment. We don't want to have kids to associate mindfulness with a punishment either. So it needs to be opt-in. It needs to be also trauma informed. So being really aware of and cognizant of what trauma looks like, how trauma can impact the way someone shows up and experiences mindfulness, and how we can create safety for kids that have, or adults that have, traumatic experiences to also be able to partake in mindfulness. And mindful schools were also really deepening and clarifying the role that mindfulness plays in diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in terms of understanding implicit bias and how that shows up for us, but also in creating a safe container for our students. Whether we're teaching a mindfulness lesson or not, but how do we be an embodied educator that creates safe learning spaces for students, and mindfulness, the role that mindfulness can play in helping to make that be so. So those are some of the things that we're working on around the school-wide implementation. We're really focused on core facilitation skills. So what does it look like to facilitate a mindfulness experience for others, as well as to facilitate a planning process and to facilitate an implementation plan and to understand and assess the conditions that are in place that are currently in place, and to kind of do some future visioning about where you want to go. So we're also developing a rubric that goes along with that, of like kind of puts our stamp on what we think a mindful schools school-wide implementation model looks like, but also gives people some ideas and ways of like starting to assess where they're at and giving them some hints about where they might want to go if they're starting to get interested in bringing mindfulness to scale. So we're very busy creating right now, and really see a lot of potential. That's kind of where we're at. And that was a lot of ramble for you, Tracy, but that's kind of where we're going.
That was a lot of meat. That was great. Great. And
yeah.
I know moving slow to move fast, that like when you talk about all these different steps, can you maybe give us a case study of, you don't have to say exactly what school it was, but like how long that process took, and walk through maybe what one example might look like of how it comes to play?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So part of why we feel confident in bringing mindful school-wide implementation forward at this point is that we're finishing up our third year of grant-funded beta testing, so to speak, of bringing mindfulness to scale in some schools in San Francisco. So we have been practicing bringing mindfulness to scale in 2 high schools, 1 K-8 and 2 elementary schools, spread throughout San Francisco, serving different backgrounds of students, different school program emphases, things like that. And we've been working with some mentors that have been working on bringing mindfulness forward. So we've been watching them carefully and applying some lessons learned as we've gone. And then we've also brought in a team of experts within our guiding teacher pool, who also have experience bringing mindfulness to scale. And so we spent a lot of time talking and working together, but we have had this test case. So an example of work that we've done is in one of the elementary schools in San Francisco. It started out with one teacher who finished our MTCP program, our year-long program for mindful schools. And she wanted to bring mindfulness to her school. And she was doing it at that point as a teacher within that school. So she started within her own classroom and bringing mindfulness forward in her classroom. And was doing that actually for a couple of years, I think. I don't have the exact chronological mapping in my mind, but a couple of years. And then the opportunity came to bring it to scale. And similar, right around that same time, she also had the opportunity to get out of the classroom and take on a leadership role where she was going into other classrooms. And so she's been bringing mindfulness to scale within that school now for multiple years. And she has her kids going to that school, and she's kind of a leader in that school. And so she started just bringing mindfulness lessons to different teachers in the classrooms, and she would go in. So part of what her model has been to push into classrooms very similar to our original plan, the original way the mindful school started out, and going in and giving those mindfulness lessons. And through the grant funding that we've had, we've been able to have teachers then also go through and take the mindfulness fundamentals and educator essentials courses as well. So not only does she bring mindfulness into the classroom herself, but she's then acting as a mentor to other teachers that are starting to bring mindfulness forward into their classrooms. So she can visit those classrooms, give the teachers feedback. She hosts little training sessions for the staff that are going through the mindfulness lessons, and continues to practice. So she'll hold practice space where the teachers can practice together. And so there's lots of different places where mindfulness is starting to take hold. And actually, it's taken hold so much at this school in particular that when they were hiring for a new principal at the school, the teachers voluntarily named that one of the requirements of being a leader at the school was to practice mindfulness, and that mindfulness was such a core part of the way they do work now that they can't imagine a leader coming in who doesn't value and support that practice. So that's a really good example of a very ground up, school implementation where kids have been exploring and working with mindfulness. Now I think we're at like 5 or 6 years at that school. So there are some kids who have never known school without mindfulness. The fifth graders that are getting ready to leave have been practicing since they were kids. And it really started from one teacher and slowly building the program over time. So that's an example of how mindfulness can really take hold in a school. And there's still more work to do there. So there's also the opportunities for mindfulness to even be more deeply embedded there. But it's a good example of how it can grow slowly and iteratively over time. And it's also an example that it actually takes time, which I think is something that people in education always want to forget. They want to go from 0 to 60 overnight and have everything be magically in place, and that's just very rarely happens that way. So if you want to bring mindfulness to scale, you have to have a plan, and you gotta be patient and kind of keep sticking with it.
Yes. And you mentioned how she helps now mentor people. So that's one of our pillars in the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully. The heart of our organization is having these communities of practice. We call them chapters for lack of a better term. It kind of goes well with the word coalition. But like in Chicagoland, we have 5 different chapters where they meet monthly and mentor each other. Because again, like this is a long process, and you can, if you feel like you're out there on your own, you feel that disappointment sometimes of maybe a conversation where you would hoped, it would go better with an administrator or such, and just having some in-person mentors that you can check in with each month. But the tie-in with Mindful Schools is that we're finding a lot of the people who are willing to facilitate those chapter meetings and be chapter coordinators are like year-long, or they've taken the year-long certification with Mindful Schools because they're just so passionate about it. And we also we don't have a lot of rules for what the chapter meetings need to look like. They could do a book study together. But what some of the chapters are doing is, again, they kind of look at all the options and decide what to do as a group. But to take the fundamentals courses together as a group, like in a cohort, it ties in just really great with how our chapter model works. So we learned in that process that there's group rates and such like this, but I thought maybe you could share a little bit about how the fundamentals training works, because there is a cohort within that you're taking the training with as well, even if you don't have anyone at your school taking it with you, and then also how the year-long certification works.
Oh yeah, sure. So yeah, to the point that I was making earlier, that we're trying to build community within our online programs. When you enroll in an online program with us, you are added into a cohort naturally, a small group of people that are going through the content together. And so your experience is of about 30 people that are going through the lessons with you, and you share a message board and have opportunities to communicate with one another. You can also actually ask to come in with your group members. So you can actually choose to be in your own cohort and go through the content together, which often groups will do, because then you're kind of learning with each other within the platform. We also have in every course now at least 2 live engagements where you're able to connect via Zoom and practice together and talk with each other, and those have been really powerful. So our courses always start out with mindfulness fundamentals, which is really just the basics of mindfulness, so that everybody has the same language and is starting from the same starting point. Educators always want to start taking whatever they're learning and bring it into their kids. It's a very natural teacher orientation, is like, what can I bring to my kids? What can I do for my kids? And so the next course that we offer is Mindfulness Educator Essentials, which is essentially offers a curriculum that you can take with your kids. We have different curriculum levels, but we have content that can support grades kindergarten through high school. And really just gives them some core lessons that they can teach, and they can repeat them, or they can start to riff off of those lessons and do their own thing. But really just some key practices to bring mindfulness into the classroom. And then if you take those 2 courses, you're eligible to go into our year-long program. which is called Mindful Teacher Certification Program. And as the presentation that you have from Sarah and Patty shows, that they presented at your conference, what we're really doubling down on in the Mindful Teacher Certification Program is embodiment and getting really clear on what embodiment means, both to embody ourselves and connect back in with ourselves, but what does it mean to be an embodied educator? Both when you're teaching a mindfulness lesson, but even more important when you're not. So, because we teach mindfulness a very small amount of our teaching work day and our teaching work week, but we're teaching all the rest of that time. So learning how to be an embodied educator is a really important part of that work. So how do you start to use mindfulness to help you to be present and aware and grounded to create a safe, trauma-sensitive, inclusive classroom for your students is kind of where we're going with that, as well as how to teach a really great mindfulness lesson and have the confidence to then start to create your own if you wanted to. So that's the Mindful Teacher Certification Program. And then now we have the School-wide Implementation Program, which we're treating right now kind of like a graduate course from Mindful Teacher Certification. So if you finish the Mindful Teacher Certification Program, you're eligible to take the School-wide Implementation Program, which is our second year long. And it takes those folks that are already passionate, who have been bringing mindfulness forward and have had some leadership experience with mindfulness and education, and gives those tools and those building blocks for taking mindfulness to scale. So those are our core offerings. We also have some new courses this year. We have a school implementation clinic. So for those of you who haven't finished the Mindful Teacher Certification Program, but you want to know how to take mindfulness to scale in your school, we have a course that follows after Mindful Educator Essentials called School Implementation Clinic. And it is a 6-week course that's self-directed, and it comes with 6 months of kind of like what you have with your chapter studies, of 6 months of kind of like a professional learning community where you can get on a live call and share problems of practice with other people that are also bringing mindfulness to scale in their settings. So you can get direct advice from one of the mentors or people that are leading the work for Mindful Schools, but you also can learn from one another. So that's our school implementation clinic. We've had for a while, and they're great courses, Difficult Emotions and Mindful Communication, which are really great for this moment in time when you're home and you're dealing with a lot of difficult emotions, and you probably need to learn how to communicate in a different way with your family members. But we also actually just launched last week our newest course, which is Self-Compassion for Educators, and it's a partnership with Kristen Neff and the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, and we're really excited about that one too. So we've got a lot of different things going on. Yeah, those are our newest offerings.
Wow, I learned something new. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. I didn't realize you had the course on the mindfulness implementation. Wonderful. And so when you presented this session at our conference, were there any questions that came up at the end that people had once you shared it, or do you get any questions that people have generally?
I think once people know that we're not going to give them an answer, that it's the framing that we've been using within our group that's been writing the course, and it comes from one of the guiding teachers that is on our team, is that, going school-wide implementation is less of a recipe and more of a season to taste. So there's core components that are really important. And you have to use them based on what's going to fit the best for your setting. And so at your conference, once I gave that news, people were like, "Oh, shucks." So less questions about that, but lots of actually really inspiring examples of how people are being really creative in using mindfulness. One that's sticking out for me right now is inviting students and staff to treat the bell whenever they hear a school bell in a different way. And so at one school, they're breathing and using that school bell as a reminder to connect back in and be mindful. And I thought that was such a brilliant, simple, easy way to bring school-wide mindfulness forward, of like, right, every time I hear the bell, take a breath and kind of affirm that I'm here now. And, as a former teacher and administrator, I hate bells. They make me crazy. But if I had been using it that way, maybe I would have loved them. So I love that idea.
Wonderful. Well, is there anything else you want to share? I want to thank you for your time today. But
No, it's so nice to talk about this work. So I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.
Maybe we can end with you leading us in just a short practice. Maybe, I know I put you on the spot here, but maybe one of your favorites or something you've been using recently, personally or whatever.
Well, we like to play around a little bit. I'm a former middle school teacher, which means that this goes against every grain of my being to do it this way, but I will end it in honor of one of our lead teachers who loves to do, body breaths. And so we do different body-based breathing. And so we'll do a bunny breath together. So you have to put your ears up.
You have your angel wings behind you there. So you're
right
angel
with wings, right? So when you breathe in and breathe out, breathing in and breathing out. So that's a good one. Just some bunny breaths. So thank you.
Well, it is springtime. We're seeing the bunnies and squirrels now.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you so much, Megan.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy.